All right, so we'll get started. Good evening, everyone. This is Lori Charlton. It's February 26, 2025. Welcome to this special meeting of the Board of Finance Fund Balance Borrowing and Debt Service Committee. I'll call the meeting to order and ask that we please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to
to
the
the
flag
flag of the
of the
United States of
America,
and to the
to
republic
the republic
for which
for
it
which it
stands,
stands,
one
one
nation,
nation,
God,
under God, indivisible,
indivisible, with
liberty and
liberty and
liberty and
justice
justice
for
for
all.
all.
Okay, so to the members of the public, if you've dialed in or joined on WebEx tonight, you are muted and will not be heard by subcommittee members. And there will be no live public comment until called for during the meeting. I will open for public comment on our voting item this evening, which is agenda item 4. Members of the public are encouraged to send their comments and questions in writing to the subcommittee members, which are me, Craig Curley, and Amy Ruggiero. You can contact us through the Board of Finance page on the town website. On that page, there is a link on the left-hand side that gives an option to contact the board or contact individual board members. That will bring up a form where residents can input their name and address and include their comments. So with that, we will move to item 3, which is to hear and discuss the WPCA long-term capital and financial plan. The backup for this item is posted. Should we, Michelle, should we start on page 10 or do you want to direct us somewhere else? Page 10 is the index to the schedules.
I don't have anywhere else to first direct the subcommittee to, so I think we could start with the index.
Okay.
And I will just say that there have been no changes to the capital plan since we met on February 6th.
Okay.
The change that has been made to the financial plan is in response to this subcommittee's request during the February 6th meeting that back calculation be performed based off of a 5% annual sewer use rate increase. And so that back calculation has been performed, and that is the one change that was made to the financial plan. And really, you'll see the impact incurred on the rate stabilization fund component.
Okay. And maybe we can walk through the pieces of this, but did we also, I thought there was also a pending item regarding the sludge, if that's the right terminology, and we had to put the financial impact in the plan. Is that in there?
That was included during the February 6th meeting.
Oh, it was?
Yeah,
Okay.
so that's a $950,000 expenditure out of the operating budget that was identified then. It continues. I am still waiting for actual quotes to be received. I expect those will be received within the coming week or two. But again, I think that is a fairly reliable number at this point.
Okay. Amy and Craig, I don't know what's helpful to you. Would it be helpful to just maybe walk through this once again in terms of the, obviously changing the revenue numbers changes fund balance and bottom line and a lot of other things. Do you guys want to walk through of the highlights here? That would be helpful for me.
Yeah, I'm focused on pages 2 of 26 and 4 of 26, I guess.
Okay. So page 2 is the fund balance, starting with the fund balance roll forward?
Yeah.
Okay. So Michelle, I don't know, do you want to just walk through the highlights on this one? So this
I'm just trying to bring it up on my screen now,
Okay.
so I could do so. Okay, so starting on page 4.
I'm looking at this
Record
online,
request.
so I don't know. It's page
It's
11 of the
page
PDF.
11 of 35. In the upper right-hand corner, it says page 2 of 26.
Okay.
Page 2 of 26. Okay.
So just to make sure we're understanding this, with these projections, and I understand a lot of things can change, and in particular the rate setting, but under this scenario, we would be growing the fund balance from its current amount of 17 million up to 57 million by fiscal year 32.
Correct, with the assumptions that have been made.
Okay, so, and so obviously that increase in fund balance could also be used to offset rate increases, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So we have 40 million or so of a buildup here in fund balance that's available for rate stabilization.
And so knowing that the rates identified here are purely estimates, and I think I mentioned during our last meeting on February 6th that WPCA was moving forward with engaging professional consulting services specifically to perform a cost of service evaluation. I have since spoken with 3 consulting services about that. I'm awaiting proposals for those services, but that's going to assist us immensely when determining what an appropriate rate structure will look like. So again, this is going off of estimates at 5%. The estimate, I mean, it may not warrant an increase of 5% annually.
Okay, but with I guess the way I'm thinking of it is with the 5% increase, if you were to have 5% annual increases, you would be building up your fund balance. You would be able to absorb all of the debt service that's been assigned to the WPCA based on the current capital plan and through the proposed policy. You're building up your fund balance, which the commission may elect not to do, but may elect to use that toward debt service and rate stabilization instead.
Right.
And then you've got covered in here the sludge costs. And you also still don't have in here any assumptions on grants, right? You've just assumed that this, and I know that that was I'll say a goal, it's been talked about a lot, trying to get design plans in place and trying to build up our capacity so that we could get some external funding for some of these, but that's not in here yet. So is this, I don't want to say worst case, but this is a scenario that has a lot of things going in a more costly direction, I would say, right? No grants are built in here. So we're assuming we pay for it all, and we're assuming we have these rate increases, which we could probably moderate if the commission decides, if that fund balance were kept more stable over time. Is that fair?
That is fair, but I do want to point out to the subcommittee that when we're looking at the expenditures as they're scheduled on the current capital plan, there's no escalation factor worked in. So for example, when you see something scheduled out to the year 2032, that's in 2025 dollars.
In the capital plan?
In the capital plan. So that's just divvied up based off of what our current day cost estimate is. We didn't factor in any type of escalation.
Okay, I am surprised at that. I want to, Ms. Ruggiero has a question, but I do want to circle back to that because I thought we were putting escalations in all of the capital plan numbers, but Amy, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, when you talked about on the revenue side, the rate increases, what percentage are you going up per year? What page should I look at to see that?
That is on page. That is on page 4 of 26, if you look in the actual page number in the upper right-hand corner. The title is Estimated Revenue Requirement.
Okay, I see that. So it's, can you just direct me to where do I see the percentage of increase year over
So
year?
if you look down towards the line, it's the third from the bottom up, calculated rate percent increase.
So it looks like it's a 5 and it starts off at 5 point. Okay, so it's going from 5.45 to
So currently,
5.89.
right, so currently 5.45, we're going to have to go up to 5.89. So we're going to have a more significant bump up in fiscal year 26. We could have a more significant bump up in fiscal year 26 if the commission agrees, and then leveling out to 5% annually. Again, this is purely just an estimate and a projection.
Yeah, we were just asked that question at our last meeting, what they were doing with the,
And
how much the increase would be
yeah, and this
to
is not
people that pay
necessarily
sewer tax.
this isn't necessarily what the increase will be. Again, it's up to the commission to determine if they want to accept these increases, these proposals. And I think that the commission, the WPCA commission's decision on that should really be performed by the cost of service evaluation. There's much more that we could do outside of sewer use fees, inclusive of considering surcharges when it comes to the strength and the type of discharges that the WPCF is accepting and treating. We could also look at a benefit assessment, which we haven't made use of in the past. And we can also reevaluate our I&I rate structure.
Okay, so this is going to be, these are things that are going to be considered over time. And I know that
And
this
there's
doesn't
a
hold-
lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
I mentioned that because there's a lot of moving parts here, and this could look quite different, a year or two from now.
Right. And I understand that. I guess the way I look at it, and I want to circle back to the escalation on the capital projects, but I think the way to think about it is that if you were at this level of rate increase, I mean, it pretty clearly, this would allow the WPCA to absorb all the costs of the capital plan and more, because this is building up fund balance quite a bit.
Right.
So,
Correct.
and again,
And
there's no grants there. And I think that's I don't think anybody expects, at least I didn't expect, that the commission would come up with a 10-year plan that was, meant to be a final version of everything we're going to do over the next 10 years. I think the main concern was understanding how much debt the entity could absorb, because the initial, when we first got this, some sort of back of the envelope plan a few years ago, what it indicated was that the entity would be insolvent within 5 years, 5 or 6 years, if it did all those capital projects. So when we lay all this out, we can see that that's not the case, and that there are a number of items, I don't, 5% annual rate increases, I'm sure nobody would be thrilled about that. Maybe they could be lower, and they could be lower if we get grant money. They could be lower under different fee structure. But it's not like you're having to present, or assume 20 or 30 or 40% rate increases in order to pay for this. So that's helpful to understand. And I see Mr. Walsh joined us. I see he has his hand up, but just, I have to say, and Tom, maybe you have insight on this too, but I'm a little shocked about the escalation on the capital projects, because I was positive we put in an annual escalator on all of those projects. Some of them were higher than others because they were for specialized equipment or something, but I thought we had some number, whether it was 5% or some number on everything. And that's not the case? I think you're muted, Tom.
You're on mute.
Should be
Yeah,
bottom left.
okay, yeah, I got it.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe there is an escalation in the plan. I just sent the email to Sabrina and I'm waiting to hear back from her. But yeah, I believe there are escalation clauses in the, excuse me, in the plan.
Okay. Yeah, because that would make a difference. Obviously, that could eat into some of that fund balance increase. So we should get clarification on that. All right. Jim, did you have a question?
Yes, Ms. Gore, how would you not know that there was not rate like that these the planned spending didn't have any escalations in it? You seem pretty affirm that they don't.
Well, the numbers that I provided for the actual capital plan were based on 2025 dollars. So that's where my involvement with the adding the cost side to the capital plan came in. Other than that, I relied upon our finance department. So I was not part of that piece of the capital plan development. Again, my piece was providing the 2025 dollar amount cost estimates, updating those cost estimates to $2025 for projects that had already been identified on the plan, and then providing the schedule for those projects.
Okay, so Tom, you'll get back to us. Maybe it's somebody in finance put a escalated costs on top of these, but we should figure that out because if it's not there, it should be
Are
adjusted, I
there
think.
escalation clauses in the capital plan? Do you know if cost?
They certainly did it on the town side when we went through it.
Yes.
So, and
Yeah,
I
that's
thought it
why
was
I'm
on this
surprised. I
side as
mean,
well. It seems like it was
they
a
may have
standard
taken
procedure.
Michelle's raw data and
Yeah, but she
adjusted
doesn't.
it, but
How
we
about the
should figure that out.
town side?
Yeah.
Okay, but not for the WC. Okay. No, they're moving on. I got it. I got it. Yep, got it. Okay, thanks. Okay.
And the 5% increase that you have put in here, that doesn't take into account the compounding rate of adding 5% onto a 5% increase. So really, 5 years out, you're at like 6.4%.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we
Yes.
can hear you, Tom.
Oh, yeah. So the town side of the plan has escalation clauses in it, but the WCPA have not been escalated. So that's something we'll probably need to adjust.
Yeah, we'll have to do that.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
have to do that because that could eat up the increase in fund balance, or at least to some degree, but okay.
Thank you, Tom.
What would those escalators be, Tom?
I think it was,
5%?
yeah, 3 or 5%. I'll double check, but it was between 3 and 5%.
Okay. Craig, did you have a question?
Yeah, clarifying question, and it's a process question, but I thought what we had talked about in our last meeting was that there was going to be some type of discussion to determine what folks felt the appropriate fund balance would be. You know, right now it's a little over 17 million, growing to 57, but if we feel like 20 million or 25 million is the right number, it seems to me that you can mathematically solve for whatever the annual increase in fund balance needs to be, and then the annual rate increase would fall out. So one year it may be 2%, the next year it may be 4%. It may never need to be as high as 5%, but I thought what we had talked about was kind of backing into the rate increases that are required to maintain the target fund balance, and that's not what was done here. This is valuable information, but knowing that we have a $40 million increase in the fund balance, that to me feels like, okay, there's a missing piece here, because I don't think the objective is to grow the fund balance from 17 to 57 million. So I wonder if it makes sense to just kind of reverse engineer it so that you solve for the annual increase needed to get to the appropriate fund balance numbers on a year-by-year basis.
Is this a question for me or someone else?
Well, I mean, I guess it's a process question more generally. I guess I'm not.
So we
I'm not
hadn't
sure.
determined, at least that was my understanding. We hadn't determined what an appropriate fund balance threshold or level would be, or
Right.
goal would be. And I believed that, and maybe this was incorrect, that the ask was, because this was a 12%. When you last saw this plan, the rate increase, I think it was an annual 12%. And so we back calculated, we ended up taking that out and we back calculated, well, what would things look like if we went to 5% annually? And so that's why that was the reverse calculation that was performed in this revision of the plan.
Got it.
I honestly would not know what that target number would be for our fund balance. I would just be pulling something out of thin air at this point, and I wouldn't want to do that. I don't know
Yeah,
if it's 20 million
think-
or if it's 5 million, right?
Yeah, maybe mechanically, I think, and one of the things, the last item on our agenda was we wanted to schedule a couple more meetings, because I think we did want to, revisit the policy for both the WPCA and the Internal Service Fund regarding fund balance. But I think and to add on to Craig's point, if we've got a 5% rate assumption here and we're growing fund balance by 40 million, first of all, the numbers have to be corrected to add the escalators in on the capital projects, because that'll increase debt service. So that'll remove some of the fund balance. But then, you could have, I don't know how you wanted to present it, but we talked about the idea of using that as sort of a rate stabilization vehicle, right? So that we weren't going from increases of 2% one year and 9% the next year or something like that. And the commission would have a longer term view. Again, they would review this plan annually. We're not locking anything in stone. The whole purpose of this plan, because I don't want anybody to get too nervous about it, was just to demonstrate that the entity could actually absorb the amount of debt service that was being assigned to it. So what this tells us is that it can, assuming 5% rate increases, and no grants, and an increasing fund balance. So I think there's some numbers to be refined here, particularly on the cost of the capital projects. But I think that's pretty important, because again, when we started out on this journey a couple of years ago, this was we had a very different conclusion on this. So nobody made like 5%. So maybe it ends up being 3%, let's just say. And maybe that gets us to a certain place. And again, we still don't have grants in there. I think that's a helpful, I think, planning tool for the commission as they go forward and decide on rates, so they can have a longer term view and be planning for the fund balance and for all these other things. And that just hasn't been available before.
Right, and understood and appreciated that perspective. And I think it's not all about rates. There's other things that feed into our revenue sources as well, and that would affect rates. So that is a reason why I do want to take the time and be able to have this cost of service study performed. I think it will just definitely better inform this financial plan. It'll better inform our commission making decisions moving forward.
Okay. Well, I think before this goes to the Board of Finance, the one thing I would say, and I realize the commission already looked at this, but I think we have to add the escalators into the capital project numbers. And I
Yeah.
would say, whatever the standard is that we've been doing elsewhere, I know that these things are a guess, but when those are added in, let's just see what that looks like. And then that's understanding that there's a lot of other variables that will go into this, but at least it would give a view of what things look like on this basis. Because, you know, at the end of the day, these capital projects, either they don't get done or the town pays for them. Those were the two alternatives, you know. So we wanted to see what this entity could afford, and that's the purpose of this
Right.
exercise. So this is, you know, this is really helpful from my perspective, but I do think we have to get the debt service numbers right. So I see David's here, but David, do you know why escalators were not put into the capital project numbers here?
So yes, on the town side, we've been able to do a lot of legwork on the projects and sort of even the validity of some of the base numbers. A lot of that work has been done. So far, you know, we've obviously made a lot of progress in the last month or two, and are getting closer to being able to sort of say that the base numbers are correct. But Center Street and the there's two projects actually that have gone down. So like the Mill River and Center Street, as example of two of them, they actually went down, not up, when we started getting better estimators into them. So we actually believe that a lot of the numbers are just so far off that simply putting escalators on them, they're not even necessarily off in the they're going to be more expensive realm. A lot of them are off in the they're just totally inaccurate to even attempt to put an escalator. So we believed, you know, as in sort of that short-term window, that they generally, you know, we took sort of they would net out approach after some of the projects even went down. We do need to take another pass, put again, get the numbers loaded more accurately, and then put the escalators. So we could put them in and factor it in. It's just like kind of that you know, garbage in, garbage out approach that we don't want on these projects. And you know, we want to start being more accurate and then escalating up. So
Well,
that's why.
So, but the source of these numbers, these were from Wright and Pierce, like what?
So the source of these numbers are from previous engineering studies that have been performed, in part from Wright and Pierce's previous facilities planning report, their previous report on I&I and pump station performance, but more recently, information that we have from Ty and Bond, from Woodard and Curran. I think it's the Wright Pierce historical numbers, and those numbers are the numbers on the plan aren't directly out of the Wright Pierce report. They are inclusive of a contingency percentage that was implied internally by the town prior to my arrival. Those are the numbers that have not been updated to 2025 dollars because they are not for projects that are close to being authorized yet.
Okay.
And I would add on some of it, as we're looking at these projects and we're looking at this schedule, numerous projects are probably going to roll. There's a good chance that some of them are going to have to be, what can we do that gets us another 6 or 7 years of useful life, or maybe a little bit longer, versus a full-blown project. Just because I think even in the what the WPCA can or can't afford, and some of these plans that we've done, the feasibility of actually tackling all of these over this 10-year window versus, say, you know, a 12 or a 15-year window may change. Michelle's already, you know, come in and you know, not just, you know, the way that she's putting it, you know, as she continues now to try to get better numbers and better determinations on these, and a better assessment on the needs. Even just looking at the report with the high, medium, low, she's put a lot of attention into, what actually, something that might have been marked as a medium that might be a high or vice versa, and is probably going to be over time, in the next, few months over the course of the year, refining all of that. So there's a lot that's in flux. So we could certainly
it's
go
gonna-
back and do it and just,
Yeah.
slide things around, but that wouldn't necessarily be fair to the process.
And when it comes to our capital plan, it does need, I mean, and I know the audience here tonight appreciates that there's a need for it to be flexible, especially with the numerous projects that WPCA has in its queue. The example that David gave of the Center Street Pump Station in Forest, Maine, and the Mill River Forest, Maine, those are projects that had initially been scheduled further out. And now we're seeking authorization for approval now to begin on those projects in fiscal year 26, because more recent risk assessments have identified a need to do so.
What, in terms of your confidence on the numbers in the capital plan, how, I understand that for projects that are many years out, and I appreciate what Mr. Becker said and what you've said, Ms. Gore, for projects that are many years out, we probably haven't gotten around to, refining them to the level that we would if we were about to ask for the money now. But how many years out do we have reliable numbers in this, would you say? I mean, are you
For the
confident
next five-
about the fiscal
the-
26
For
plan?
the next 5 years out, high confidence.
Okay,
That's
Yep.
good.
Yep, because that's our most recent risk assessments. Those are our pump stations, and that's our most recent risk assessment information that we've received. So we're confident in the schedule, and we're confident in the cost estimates we've received.
okay, so, and I know Mr. Walsh has his hand up, but, so if we're confident in the next 5 years, does it make sense to at least adjust the escalators for the next 5 years numbers, just to put inflation in there?
I mean, we can certainly do that.
Yeah, I mean, if
I
the
don't think it's
numbers
gonna
that are
massively
out in the
change anything,
future-
so.
If the
Except-
numbers out in
yeah.
the future are so uncertain that they could go in either direction, I hear what you're saying. But for the numbers that are shorter term, whether it's the next year or the next 5 years, if those are solid, I think
Yeah.
I would go ahead and apply those increases and just reflow those through the plan. That would be my suggestion.
Yeah, not pushing, giving an explanation, not pushing back. So I mean, we're
Yeah.
more than happy to
Yeah,
to make
and I
that
think
adjustment.
we
can
could
do that.
definitely do that for our phase 1 pump stations and force mains and our phase 1 plant upgrades.
Okay, I'm just going to take some notes here. Jim, did you have a question? Jim, you are muted. I don't know if you're trying to ask a question.
I think it's more of a comment. I don't even know why we're doing a 10-year plan then. Because they don't even know when they're going to be doing projects, what the price is going to be at this point in time. They're still looking at whether the cost estimates are anywhere near logical, anywhere close to, they haven't gotten to that point. I mean, it sounds like a big focus has to just be for a 5-year plan, not a 10-year. I mean, they're talking about extending things like just to make it extend the operation for like 6 years because they can't even handle the project. Why would we put the project in if they can't handle it? It makes no
Well,
sense.
yeah,
mean, it's a false report then.
Can I just say, I don't agree with that. We are talking about financing these projects with 20-year bonds. And so I think there is a need to have a longer term view because we have to understand the cumulative impact of this debt service. So I think at least a 10-year look is good. I mean, obviously we'll have a waterfall. I don't think the answer is not to do the plan. I think the answer is that over time, those longer term numbers are gonna have to be refined and get more accurate. But, I don't think a shorter term view is necessarily helpful because we don't want to sit here and say, okay, we're good for 5 years, but we know all the big stuff is going to come years 6 through 10. And at that point, we have no capacity left to pay debt out of this entity. So that was kind of the point of this. But I do agree, yeah, we have to, the numbers have to get more accurate for the analysis to be as valuable as it ultimately needs to be.
Then our board and the public has got to be told how suspect this spreadsheet is after, I don't even know, it would be 5 years, might be less. And then it's just basically guess.
Well, our capital plan's always been that way, right? We've
And
never
so-
had a high level of confidence, but the idea is
So-
we've always worked to identify projects so that we don't, so that we understand what's coming down the pike. I mean, the cost
Right.
estimates have never been highly accurate when we get down. At least we know that we're going to have major projects coming or buildings or whatever. And that informs, what we're willing to sign up for in the short term, knowing what we've got in the future. So I hear you. I don't think you're wrong, but I think our entire capital plan forever has always been, a lot of guesstimating when you get past 5 years or even 3 years, honestly.
But the numbers being so off, with being the numbers we've been getting at our board of what they were supposed to be, and seeking approval for things that are off by 100, 200 or more % when they come to us. We really need to figure out what the 2025 number is so that we get some accuracy back into this report. And we don't have that now.
I
So-
don't think,
May
is
I-
anybody
may I-
not confident
may
with
I-
25 numbers?
Can
Or-
I,
Yes.
No, I'm not
Can I
talking
take-
about 25
Also-
numbers. I'm talking about all the numbers
May-
that are in the project.
all right, so,
May I also speak to
Yeah.
part of that just
Yeah.
to begin? So for the projects that are the nearest, coming up in the nearest term, and by that, I'm saying within the next 5 years, we have high confidence in the numbers. They've been updated to $2025. In the projects that are further off than that, there will likely be changes in needs at that point in time. So we can seek updated cost estimates to $2025, but will the actual project needs be the same in the year 2031, for example, as they are in the year 2025 or 2026? Likely no. And that's why our capital plan before this exercise was in the place that it was, because those numbers were, again, based off of 2016 to 2018 information. And our infrastructure isn't static, it's constantly changing. And there's additional needs that have arisen since that time. So I'm just putting that out there for the board's in this committee, subcommittee's consideration, is that infrastructure needs do change over time. And it's not that the project will be a project that we're not going to pursue, we will, but it's likely that the project may be broader in scope the further along that we wait.
Building extra capacity into the system as we go forward. Because if you're not, then you're not planning. Because as you talk about your needs, I presume that you're preparing for 25, 30% more growth because your stuff lasts so long. And it served us well for so long, a period of time. But now all of a sudden, I just hope we're not cutting it too close when we're building things or putting the proper pumps in. Like, is like the lines being brought, what do you think the capacity is? How much do you think it's going to go up? Have you guys done studies of this?
We did. So we had a facilities plan prepared for us in 2018, and the state of Connecticut actually requires all WPCAs update those plans on a 20-year rotation. So that's our current plan. That's the plan that we'll be operating off of for the next several years. And a capacity evaluation was performed as part of that plan. It was also identified as part of that plan that inflow and infiltration is a significant amount of the WPCF's current intake, up to half of what we currently take in. That's a large amount of our capacity right there, taken up with clean water that we do not need to accept or be treating. That's the reason why we're tackling I&I through projects like the East Trunk Line, through our Phase 5 I&I rehabilitation project now.
With all the millions of dollars we've given for I&I, where are the savings in the spreadsheets that you have here? Or projected savings?
I mean,
Trying to
what,
understand that
what's the
question.
like, why would we, that wouldn't produce savings? It would prevent a need to build additional capacity because we're not wasting
Yeah.
the capacity we have. I mean, that's been.
So that,
when are we going to
I mean,
start
I'm
seeing
just
the,
going based on, you know, we've talked about this with John Marsilio for a couple of years now, but, you know, the concern is that we're losing capacity because basically we've got leaky pipes, to say it non-scientifically. So we got to fix that. Otherwise, we'd be in a position of having to build more.
you
So-
could have had to have done 100 million in plant upgrades and all of these other things, which would have been double what we're looking at now. So I think what we've also looked at is, and we talked about this in our planning for the overall financials, is you're essentially able to increase your capacity while, you know, at the plant, while you are not then necessarily having to, you know, pay for that increased additional capacity because the I&I, so your throughput at the plant ends up netting itself over time. As we improve I&I, but we bring additional users on, there's essentially a net that's assumed there as well. So we benefit two different ways the faster we get this I&I issue under control. So that's accounted for in numerous ways in this. And I would just say, you know, we plan for 10 years. One of the things that we're beginning to start to do, and there is a column, it's been living in the 2035 column. We're probably just going to label it as such. But as we have items that are substantial that we know are going to need to be done, even if they don't live within the 10 years, honestly, we're going to start putting them on the plan in some form so people understand that, because if it gets 2 years later, it gets loaded into year 10 and then starts moving itself forward, this is the snapshot for everybody to see what's coming down the line, even if it's not in the first 5 or 10 years. If it's big and we know about it, we need to start disclosing that, and we start to getting our heads around it and making sure the boards are aware of that.
So can I just to add a suggestion here, because you know, so that we can maybe wrap up on this one item. Can we agree that for the number, I mean, I think we've got to just be clear with everyone what, and I think it's in the spreadsheets, but just as we're walking through it with the board, which numbers have a higher level of certainty, what years do, and what years are just, you know, based on older estimates that will get revisited over time. So just make that clear for everybody. And then the other thing I would say, again, is to just add the cost escalators for the nearer term numbers that are certain, so that we have that built in and we can see a better impact on the long-term, you know, financial status of the entity, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. Thank you.
And then the capital plan itself and all the things that are going to be necessary, you know, what might be helpful, and we have to figure out when we can do this, because I know Monday or Tuesday rather of next week, we have this on the agenda. But if we can figure out a way to fit it in, and Michelle, you would know, if there's a broad overview of the studies that you've gotten done, where maybe, you know, just a refresher to kind of let everyone know the scope of what has to happen, that might be helpful. I think we've had this discussion before, but it's always been project-based. we've had these spreadsheets and there've been all these there's been a couple of dozen discrete projects listed at various points in time, but maybe just an overview of the, the status of the whole system and how you guys are approaching it. It might just give some context to this.
I could definitely do that for the next meeting.
Okay. Does anyone, Jim, you had a follow-up?
Yeah, for the meeting, can we get some estimate on what the inflationary amount's going to be and how is that determined? Do we have that from one of our experts that we pay? Or are we just generating that in the finance department?
We have typically been using a 5% escalator unless we have better information. That's considered that's similar to what the Board of Education was using. That's more of a commercial, construction escalator cost.
And how do we know that? I mean, I don't care whether the Board of Education is using that. That's for their own
Well,
purposes as well. But I
there's
mean,
bench. I mean,
shouldn't we be talking to people that are experts in this area about what they're seeing as for the projects that they've been working on, what the escalators have been year to year?
We can certainly go back and quantify that. At the time that they were using that, as my understanding, there are some benchmarkings on inflation for projects like government is certainly higher. You don't use 3% as an example for those, but we want to benchmark that. We certainly can try to tie that out a little bit better.
I just think
Yeah.
our board would be better served if we have some explanation of what that is, as opposed to just accepting it. So that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
we'll-
actually a
we'll go
good thought.
back.
And maybe we can ask whoever was responsible for putting the, I know we had a variety of firms that we use to help us get our arms around all this work, but even if we were to just run that by and, see if there's if they have any view on that, that would be helpful. Okay. Craig, do you have, Amy, other questions on this plan?
Nope. Thank you.
No, I mean, the only thing I would say is I do like having I understand Mr. Walsh's point, but I do think having the plan for 10 years is helpful because at least it shares the thinking and when projects that we're aware of, if we know a refresh is coming up in years 6 through 10, it's something we certainly want to be mindful of. And it is consistent with the way that we've done the rest of the town. So I think it's helpful to know what the strategy is past year 5.
Thank you. Okay. All right, so if there aren't any other questions on that, Jim, you have one more?
Just, Madam Chairwoman, if you can, that night when we're doing this, I think we should have a discussion on updating this 10-year plan, because if something is in there that's going to be, we have in there as being new, that'll last 20 years or so. And say next year, they're like, oh, it's like what Mr. Becker said. Oh, we might just, they can't handle the capacity of all these jobs. So we're going to do a fix that's only going to be for 6 to 9 years. We need that as soon as possible in this plan every year.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I agree. And I
Yeah.
think,
There's
think,
got to be an updating of this on a yearly basis.
Agreed.
I think more frequent,
So-
Jim, honestly. And David, I know you want to, I do want to move
Yeah.
on after this, but we have, I don't know how many times we've gotten a capital plan update this year, but I think it's been at least quarterly, if not more frequent, because we've been trying to go through this transition and get this to be more accurate. So I don't think this one is any different. I think when every time we get an update on the capital plan and the waterfall as a whole, it should include the latest numbers for this plan. And because this one drives a lot of what's happening in the overall one, both from a dollar impact and then the impact on funding. So I agree with that. I know it takes time and we haven't gotten there yet, but I agree that would be helpful. And I feel like we've gotten away from this once a year view of this capital plan, which is a good thing because it's not accurate enough to be doing it once a year.
Yeah.
And so that'll be helpful.
If I could, I just want
Yeah.
to, I'm not being flippant about the timing and the movement of, I'm speaking more to the stage that we're at right now. If we want to continue, if we don't want to move things, we're trying to avoid moving things forward in a vacuum. At the same point, we are at a point where we do need to start to move some things forward. And we are looking at all of those items. Michelle still has only been here so long. We're only so far, but we do plan to, to the chair's point, we really, this is no longer just the annual summit. We've agreed to a much more frequent timeline of keeping this updated. It is internally, a second that we have better information or things changing, it's an ongoing process now internally. We want to be best available at all times, and that's going to continue.
Okay, thank you. All right, so why don't we, so we have a couple of open items. So when we present this at the Board of Finance, can have sort of an overview of the, maybe as Ms. Ruggiero said, at the strategy, or kind of an overview of the long-term plan and how we've been looking at this and where, what resources we've been utilizing to help management get their arms around it, where that process stands, where it's solid, where it's not, where it's still just high-level estimates. So we could do that. We could add the cost escalators in for the capital plan on those, for those years where we have more assurance that those plans are solid. And we will get some feedback or some benchmarking on the cost escalators themselves so that everyone can understand the source of that assumption. And then, yeah, we'll take a look and see where that leads us. So again, it's come a long way. So thank you guys for doing this. I know it's been a lot, but there's a lot of good work here. So thank you again. All right, we will move to item 4. To hear, consider, and act upon the WPCA funding policy for WPCA capital projects. So motion to hear this item, Mr. Curley, seconded by Ms. Ruggiero. So this item is before us, and this document is posted online, and it's, I guess we'll go back to page 1, or actually the actual policy starts on page 2 of the posted backup. And so for the benefit of the public, we did look at a first draft of this at our last meeting, but this is a funding policy that lays out a set of guidelines that would be used to determine how WPCA projects are funded, meaning what portion of the bonding or the debt service is picked up by the town versus the WPCA ratepayers. So, Michelle, do you want to, I know that, I don't know how many changes were made on this from the last time, but anything you want to walk through here in terms of highlights, and then we can go to Q&A?
The changes were merely some minor language changes as a result of town legal counsel's review of the document. And that was really specific to section 7.0 of the document, funding procedures, the approval process. Language in regards to the representative town meeting was modified to more specifically indicate that the RTM provides the final step of authorization to proceed. And also legal counsel commented on the frequency that this document should at a minimum be reviewed and revised. Legal counsel had indicated this should at least be reviewed and revised on an annual basis.
Okay.
The other question that had been posed by this subcommittee during our previous meeting on February 6th was, should this document be termed a policy or should it be considered funding guidelines? Legal counsel responded indicating that if the intention is to use this in a more formal advisory way, then it should move forward as a policy. If it's something that's meant to be more flexible and not to be relied on in a more formal way, we could consider it guidelines.
Okay. I have a question, but let me turn it over first. Did the members of the committee have questions on this?
Yeah, I just want to, well, a couple questions. Did any of the dollar amounts, so I see here in the policy, it's, you know, the 50-50 with the town and for projects, the way they're splitting them, and any changes on any of the dollar amounts?
There has been no changes to the percent allocations or the classification categories or project types within each classification.
Okay. And today, this is considered a policy today, correct?
Correct.
Proposed policy, yeah.
Proposed,
Mhm.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I would think it would be a policy versus guidelines, especially based on those definitions. I think that's what we're looking for, because we want to stick within this. Otherwise, it seems very uncertain as to how splits and things are working. But just my thoughts.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I agree on the policy. I do have a question. So, and I think all this makes sense, but I just wanted to understand the thinking behind some of these and how this might practically be evaluated. Because clearly there's some judgment here. And if I look at the funding breakdown by project classification and type, so this is section 4.0, which is page 3 of the PDF. The second category, I'll just pick that one first, but so projects necessary to support commercial development and increase capacity, 50/50 WPCA in town. So in theory, I agree with that. We took that approach on East Trunk Line already. But how do we, I mean, a lot of things could support commercial development, right? It depends, I guess, to what extent. So,
I
I
think
think any project you could make, in theory, you could make a case that it, at some level, even a regular maintenance project could at some level support commercial development. So that seems a little bit,
So I think there's a qualifier we need to consider here. It's the
Okay.
and it's not an or. So I
Okay.
think where you're going with it, Lori, is if this was an or statement, necessary to support commercial development or increase capacity, what would
Okay.
we consider supporting commercial development? And it could be a range of project types, and that would bring in a need to be more flexible with the interpretation. But this is actually to support commercial development and to increase capacity.
Okay. Okay, so if, let's just say, putting this in action, if you bring a project up for approval and you think it meets this criteria, what we'd expect to see is justification for these elements, right? You would tell us this is how it's going to increase capacity, how much it's going to increase capacity by, et cetera. So we would not be making these decisions on a case-by-case basis in terms of the funding, but on a case-by-case basis, there's judgment to evaluate whether the project fits into the correct bucket here. And that would
Correct.
start with the commission and have to get approval by all the funding bodies as well, right? Okay.
Correct. That's the intention anyways.
Yeah. And then the other question I had was, so the routine infrastructure rehabilitation and replacement, you know, normal maintenance, 100% WPCA, that makes total sense. We talked about the 50-50. So the plant upgrades and community impact assessments, I thought, and maybe Jim remembers this, so that we have 75-25. I thought at some point, I could be mistaken, that conceptually we talked about the plant upgrade being a town expense. And I don't know if there's some history on this, but
The history is really challenging to find. So
Okay.
since our last meeting, I've talked to a number of individuals, both within the town and with former WPCA commission members. And I have not yet found what that breakdown was for the plant improvements. This last round of significant plant improvements that occurred almost 20 years ago now.
And so what was your thinking? And I'm not trying to challenge it, but you know, I can understand 50-50, but what is the thinking behind the 75-25? What was the basis for that recommendation?
I think the basis for that recommendation is purely that WPCA is the owner of this infrastructure, and when there is an upgrade, it's non-routine, but in a way, it's coming to end of life, and that is a known. So WPCA is taking more of a vested financial interest in that type of project than the town would be. I think that's also part of the technical studies as well. When we're looking at, and these are just examples here, we're looking at sustainability and climate change and site assessments. Those are projects that would more benefit the WPCA specifically versus the town. The 75-25, that could be a 60-40, that could be it could vary. I was just looking to identify WPCA as taking more of a lead, a greater than 50% lead in funding those projects than the town would.
Okay. Jim?
I think the last time there was a major upgrade to the facility, it was 100% paid for by the town. I don't think it would take much to look back to see that huge bond that was approved. That's the way it was done. And when people talked about it back then, it was because it benefited the entire town. It benefited all of the commercial and retail and restaurants of the whole downtown and Black Rock Turnpike. And that's the way we looked at it.
So was that, you might remember this, Jim, we had Clean Water Act bonds that fell off the schedule a year or two ago. Was that the financing for that, or was that for something else? Do you remember?
I don't know, but it could have been.
Does that timing make sense though, that we would have done this like 20 something years ago? The last one?
And I guess we'd have to have Betsy look it up about where that was, but
Okay.
it was a lot of money. And the same questions were asked back then, and the town made a decision.
Yeah, I mean, And that's why I asked my last question. I'm not, that makes some sense. I think that what Michelle articulated makes some sense too. So I think the reason we want to have a policy is we don't have one right now, and I'm not sure we're necessarily bound to anything we did 20 years ago, but it is helpful to understand the thought process that we had back then and whether that still makes sense. So right now, understanding that we end up with different taxpayers that have financial responsibility here. And by putting this in the WPCA, we do have the universities and others, right? Investing in the infrastructure too, and they are beneficiaries. So, and they're obviously bigger than they were, probably the last time we did this. So, yeah, I don't know. Were there any other, did the commission have, Michelle, did they feel strongly about this? Or was it a discussion topic or?
It was discussed by the commission. I will say that there weren't specific requests for taking another look at the funding breakdowns at this time. I think the direction that the commission is heading with this is we don't currently have a funding policy. We have not had one. This is a positive step forward. And let's see how this plays out.
And the plant upgrades start what year in the plan?
Next year in fiscal
Next
year
year.
26.
Okay, so this is going to be, this will be on us quickly. And is there any other, I know putting together this plan, the team looked at other financial plans of other WPCAs, and I know you've done a bunch of benchmarking along the way. Do we have any idea what other municipalities are doing?
We have some idea. I think that it becomes challenging when breaking it down to comparing what our funding breakdown, our specific percent breakdowns would look like compared to another WPCA and municipality, is because the differing needs. Even if we look at municipalities that are somewhat similar to Fairfield, when we look at our WPCA's capital plan in particular, we look quite different. So I'd be hesitant to really compare any type of breakdown by project classification, what for us against what another WPCA and municipality might have in their agreement. And I know that they're using their funding policies likely more like guidelines is my understanding. There's flexibility when it comes to making these determinations on more of a case-by-case basis, and then reviewing these policies with the annual budget cycle.
Okay. Other comments? Jim?
Yeah. Michelle, have you looked at what the annual increases are at surrounding towns? Are they all charging 5% increases in their sewer use fees?
It varies, and so I think that the most comprehensive rate study that's been performed, because I think that's what you're alluding to, Jim, was performed by Ty and Bond back in 2019. And that's something that's quite a reliable benchmark, their piece of research that we could refer to still. But again, it's like comparing apples to oranges in a way. our rate increases are really specific to our community and our specific infrastructure needs. It is one reason why, again, I am seeking the assistance of professional consulting services for a cost of service evaluation.
All right, do you think they'll be able to help you find a community that's similar to ours, or multiple communities that are similar to ours in regard to our needs? I mean, our needs are different. I mean, Bridgeport gets more money from grants and all sorts of things. I don't know, obviously we can't compare ourselves to that, but there certainly are communities that are similar to us who are along the coast, who have populations that are maybe not exactly like ours, and need to do the same thing. And, you know,
and everyone's infrastructure needs are different. Everyone's capital plan reads differently. We happen to have a capital plan in place right now that has competing priorities identified because we've deferred for a period of time. So since that 2018 facilities plan was published, we've deferred on significant work that needs to be done. Now that we don't have the luxury of being able to schedule the work in tiers, there's work that's going to have to be done in parallel and not in series. And that is something that is different, that makes us stand apart from other WPCAs and municipalities that otherwise look very similar.
Okay. Let me ask the committee members this question too. I think, Amy, you already gave your point of view. I agree with you. I think it's important to have a policy. I think there's judgment in how it's applied, but I think what we did not want to do was make these decisions on a case-by-case basis. We wanted some overriding set of principles that would determine, based on, you know, fairness, if nothing else, how these costs get split among our taxpayers. Ultimately, the money's going to have to be spent, or it's going to be spent on a different time frame. But it's not a question of whether the work has to ultimately be done. It's just a matter of how the costs get divvied up. And at least I thought of it from, you know, having a sense of fairness in terms of how those costs are split, and not creating a situation where you have this ad hoc method of allocating costs here or there based on how the capital plan looks that year. You know, I don't think that's necessarily the right way to do it. Okay, we're gonna we're gonna stuff this sewer project in and take something else off. I think it, you know, most of the taxpayers in both entities, there's a cross section, 75% of them or something anyway. But I think it should be a policy. That's my view. I don't know, Craig, do you have a different view?
Not necessarily. I mean, I guess in our last meeting we were talking about this, and the point that I made then was, if it's a guideline, there's flexibility. If it's policy, it becomes more rigid. My thinking, I agree that we can't do this on a case-by-case basis, but my thinking was that if we could establish a guideline that says this is the starting point based on these criteria, and Michelle did a great job of kind of outlining a whole bunch of scenarios or circumstances where one it would apply one way or the other. But if it's a guideline and we feel like, all right, this project's a little bit unique, we should take it on a case-by-case basis. We use the guideline as the starting point, and then if we want to shift from a 50-50 to a 60-40, even though 60-40 is not prescribed anywhere, it's a negotiated point. I don't think it makes sense to negotiate every single time. That's crazy. But I do worry that a policy becomes so rigid that it's hard to have the flexibility to accommodate something other than what's prescribed.
Yeah, I think where that resonates with me is the 50-50 piece on the commercial development. Because again, that could be, you could have a project that maybe deserves a higher percent there than 50-50, but that's how we've got it. So, but nonetheless, I think we have to have something set out. If there's a mechanism in here, we could add words to it at some point to, maybe create an exception or a mechanism to deviate from it. Maybe that would get us there. But I think
I was
it's,
just gonna,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, go ahead.
I was gonna suggest the same. I think it'd be helpful. I mean, I totally understand the concern there, but I think that if you have a policy, at least you have a framework that's set that everybody knows. And there is, there's clear transactions. And if on the, if there is going to be an exception, that's when you come and you reach out to get approval on it.
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit cleaner that way, as opposed to just having a guideline, because then when you have just a guideline, when is it set forth that they have to come? I just feel like that's a little more subjective for me.
Agreed.
Yeah,
Just
I
just
agree.
my thoughts.
Yep.
Yeah. Jim?
I just don't know what the definition of commercial development is. To me, commercial development is all those apartment buildings along Commerce Drive that have popped up over the last 10 years. That's commercial development because those are
Yeah.
all commercial builders. Commercial development is what's going to happen at the train station property
Mm-hmm.
that's about to happen. Commercial development is, I think, all of these businesses that are starting to pop up 830G houses and double the number of residences in the town. To me, that's all commercial development. Because that's a business that's creating all of this stuff. And I don't know whether that's defined here, but I think it's going to have to be defined here. Because otherwise people are going to be like, oh, I don't know if that's commercial development. I'm talking about developing a commercial piece of property for a business or a factory or, manufacturing facility.
Yeah.
But
Oh, no,
all
I
of
would,
that
I would
stuff-
agree with that. Like the Metro Center area I know there's commercial things there, but if we're talking about putting in, large housing developments and apartment buildings and things like that, that certainly would fall under the criteria of what I would think of as more commercial development. It's not single family homes. So yeah, I agree.
I think the definition needs to be in this policy. So that there's no confusion about it of what the town would be responsible for and what the WPCA would be responsible.
Okay, so let's go to the policy quickly. So if we say, so I think this would go back to the concepts under, where am I? Okay. So on page 3, so we say projects necessary to support commercial development and increase capacity. Let's look at how that's defined right now. Infrastructure extension, sewer collection systems extension pursuant to the town's POCD, infrastructure expansion, non-routine infrastructure rehabilitation or replacement, collection system, pump statements, technical studies. I mean, Michelle, in your mind, does that, if we're putting up, a bunch of apartment buildings, let's just say, would that activity fall under this definition, these bullet points in your mind?
I would rely on the town's plan of community development to clearly define commercial development.
Okay.
I think we should have zoning come before us then.
what is do you know what the POCD says now? I mean, we can grab it, but do you know how it's defined there?
I don't offhand.
Okay. Okay, well, we can get that. I mean, it may not require any, it may not require any update if it's sufficiently fleshed out there. Okay. Any other comments on this, David?
Well, just on that word commercial and just in development in general, one thing to look at is maybe the housing complexes, but the commercial isn't necessarily going to be a big driver. It's going to be houses. You have a cul-de-sac and there's 10 houses. That's going to generate more than putting a small business and, in an area, or even a large business.
Yeah, I
with,
was more
one,
thinking of the
one,
infrastructure like when I read the definition in this document, and I think about some of the things we've heard in the past where, these apartment buildings go up and then there's, obviously lines have to be extended and there's hookup fees and all that sort of thing. So I feel like that kind of fits into what's written here. And I apologize, I need to step away you guys can continue this. I need to step away for 30 seconds. I'll be right back.
Okay.
I think if we find out what it means, I think it'll just clarify it. So if we find out what they mean by commercial, I think it's definitely worth it because I certainly would consider one of those, complexes with apartments, certainly, one of these projects.
yes, I'm trying to see if I can find on mine, but
Okay.
POCD
Sorry
is
about that.
posted.
Okay, any other comments on this document?
Nope.
So it's up to the committee. I would be comfortable voting on this and bringing it to the Board of Finance just so we get that done and we can bring it before the Board of Finance sooner rather than later. And, hopefully we can get some of these follow-up points cleared up before then. But the board may have other questions as well. So if it's okay with you guys, I would, even knowing that we have a couple questions here, I'm comfortable voting on this, but I'll leave it up to Craig and Amy. Are you okay with that?
I am.
Okay.
I do see Jim's got his hand up though.
Yeah, Jim?
Would we be able to have Jim Wendt available on the night that gets presented to the Board of Finance so we could talk to him about what commercial is, how it's described in the POCD? So
Yeah,
we could
I'll
all
ask-
have a.
I'll ask about that, and if hopefully he's available, but if not, maybe we can have the conversation or have something written up for a benefit in case. But yeah, that's a good suggestion.
And proposing to vote on it tonight, that's clearly, and Lori, I know you stepped away, but we certainly do need to find out the answer of what that is. So I think
Yes.
we're voting on it, but that's subject to, like, if there's an open question there.
Yes, subject
We're
to,
just
so
really
we're just
voting
clarifying.
to bring
And-
this in
and-
front of the board.
100%. So this is so we'll take it out of this committee, but all that does is bring it before the full board. So we know
and
there's
Lori-
a couple of items and we'll have the discussion with the full board. And some of the things we can follow up on is we can double check the last funding mechanism for the plant upgrade and how much that was and how it was done. We'll get this clarification around commercial development and based on that, see if there's, if it's adequately defined in the POCD and it's clear, we may not need to do anything here, but at least everyone understands what it means. And then we can just talk about whether the board wants to put any qualifiers in for, to provide flexibility on the language. And to me, that would be something along the lines of, to the extent management feels that it's appropriate to deviate from these percentages for any reason, that needs to be supported by X, Y, and Z and voted on by all the bodies. And in reality, every one of these transactions has to be voted on by all three bodies anyway. We vote on an MOU with
Right.
every time we vote on the bond authorization anyway. So, but just to clarify that we can put that in there if that makes people feel comfortable.
And Laura, you're hoping to take this, put it on the Tuesday agenda
Yes.
next week?
Yeah.
Great.
It is. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So let's, oh, I guess I should ask, I don't see anybody on, but we did say we'd open up for public comment. I don't see anybody here.
Don't see anybody yet.
Okay. So we'll vote all those in favor of approving the WPCA funding policy for WPCA capital projects. Please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. So that's unanimous, and we will bring this forward to the board next week. Thank you, Michelle, for the work you put into this. It's really well done, really comprehensive. Appreciate it.
You're welcome, and thank you to the subcommittee for asking for the development of this funding policy. It's definitely is one of the baseline needs to a successful WPCA.
Yeah.
That in
Right.
conjunction with the financial plan and a reliable capital plan.
Agreed. Thank you. All right, so we will move on to item 5, which is to hear, consider, and act upon a meeting schedule for 2025. So motion to hear this item. Mr. Curley, seconded by Ms. Ruggiero. I did not hand anything out, but as I looked back at our objectives for the committee, we've done most of the things we set out to do, but one of the things we talked about potentially doing, and this is something that we've talked about as a board for a number of years, is looking at a policy for fund balance in the internal service fund. And so that's something I would love to see us take a shot at and try to get done this year. So what I would propose is that we try to schedule after budget season, just put 2 more regular meetings on the calendar, a month apart. If we don't need 2 meetings, we don't have to do it. Maybe we just need 1, but this way they can be regular meetings if we schedule them.
Okay.
And,
Yep.
I would ask, and I'd like to move them a little bit past the end of the budget season to give management some time, because similar to the WPCA policy, I think it would be helpful if this were a draft that was originated by management versus, the board coming up with it or the committee coming up with it. So, Tom, since this will be partially on you or mostly on you and your team, how does everybody feel about maybe the 3rd week of April and then maybe like mid-May to do this? I'll just throw a couple dates out and see if this works. But what about like April? We could do 6 p.m. meetings. Do you guys want to do them on a Board of Finance night, or would you rather just do it separately? I was thinking maybe April 23rd and then maybe, I don't know, May 21st, something like that.
I think that works for me.
The weeks should work, but Wednesdays are bad for me.
Okay. Are Thursdays better?
Thursdays are better. So you want to do April 24th?
All right, that works for me.
That works for me.
Oh, wait a minute, April 24th. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so,
And then want to do May 22nd?
April 24th and May 22nd. Okay, 4/24 and 5/22. Okay. All right, that
What
works.
time did you say is the starting time? Did you say 6 or 7?
We can do whatever we want. I find the
6:30.
6 o'clock to be convenient, but it's up to
Yeah,
you guys.
I think 6 is good.
Okay,
So we're
Yep.
doing April 24th and May
May
22nd.
22nd.
Okay.
Okay, so hopefully that gives everybody some time to come up for air after the budget. And I think as part of the budget process, we'll probably be talking about this internal service fund anyway, because there's, a bunch of changes that happen this year and they impact the budget. So we'll have some background on that. All right. So we can vote then. So all in favor of approving the remaining meeting schedule, which is April 24th and May 22nd, 2025, both at 6 p.m. Raise your hand. Okay, it's unanimous. Perfect. All right, so we'll move to item 6, motion to adjourn. Amy, Craig, all right.
So,
Thank you
all right,
very
have
much.
a great night, everybody.
You
Yeah,
too.
Thank you.
thanks for
Night.
coordinating.
you,
Thank you.
Tom. Thank
Good
you.
night.